Hey everyone, this is Mike Andes, and you're listening to the Business Bootcamp podcast. Today we're going to be talking about an uncomfortable topic that most people try to push aside, but has to be addressed. I've talked about it in the past lightly. Today we're going to talk a little bit deeper, and we're going to be talking about depression and suicide in the entrepreneurial community. Before we get into today's show, though, a big thank you to today's sponsor, which is Gusto. If you haven't already, go to gusto.com/bootcamp and see the cheapest and most user-friendly experience of submitting payroll ever. Not only is it the cheapest at $6 per month per employee, it's going to be super easy for you to submit payroll, submit the hours, and it does the rest for you. So go check it out today. Go to gusto.com/bootcamp and get a free 90-day trial of their software. So today we're going to be talking about overcoming entrepreneurial depression. And this is something that I've mentioned before briefly on the podcast several times. And I do feel that like one day I'll probably write a book on it, but not in the near future. I'd say probably in the next 3 to 5 years. It's something that the fine print to all of this is I'm not a depressive type of person. I'm pretty moody, but I'm never depressive. I'm never really like suicidal or anything like that. However, I've been with a lot of entrepreneurs, and that's really who I'm focusing on today. Like a lot of these things we're going to talk about today could be taken for anyone that is going through depression or is suicidal, but speaking specifically today to my audience here on Business Bootcamp podcast, I'm thinking more in terms of an entrepreneur and the things that they're going through. And so it's a real thing. And I think one of the first things is to realize that a lot of people go through it, even as entrepreneurs. The level and the percentage and rates of suicide in the entrepreneurial community is pretty high, simply due to the amount of stress, all the different factors that we've talked about here on the podcast before, that adds to the anxiety, adds to the pressure of living by simply owning a business, especially a small business where there is certain levels of risk. There's certain levels of competitors moving in and wiping you out. The internet changes everything. Changes in the economy and things. There's a lot of change and risk in being a small business owner. And so because of that, because your livelihood as a small business owner depends on it, your family depends on it, that small business puts food on the table for you, your employees, and their families. There's a lot of pressure that can be put on the shoulders of the small business owner. And so sometimes the reason someone will get depressed as an entrepreneur, as a business owner is, as an employee, you see a symmetrical parallel line between how hard you work and the amount of effort and time you put in and their paycheck. And so from a financial standpoint, it can cause a lot of stress being a small business owner, because you work longer hours, you put more and more effort in, you might even sacrifice more and more money, sacrifice more and more family time, sacrifice maybe even your health, and there is no direct correlation seemingly at the start that the more you put in, the more you get back. As an hourly wage employee, you get paid the more you work, the more you make. And when you hit 40 hours or more a week, you make 1.5 times your hourly rate. So the more and more you work, the more and more you make. And traditionally, as an employee, if you continue to work hard and invest more time and energy and skill into your labor, you're going to get a higher wage per hour. And so you're going to make even more money. The more you sacrifice to the business, you'll get promoted, elevated within the company, and you make more and more money. From an entrepreneur's business standpoint, like I said, they can be pouring more and more and more in, sacrificing more and more and more, giving more and more, and still the business is losing money. That can be very demoralizing, and yet all that while they're expected to be a leader, they're expected to be positive, they're expected to still pay the paycheck to everyone else in their organization, and that can be very, very stressful and lead to a very dark place financially when you can't put food on the table, or you do have to go into debt, and that creates more stress, and then that creates stress within relationships within your family, and that starts tearing you apart on a personal side. And so I see so many times that, I mentioned this to someone last week, the three things I see that pulls relationships apart so many times is, the money, relationships, and religion, and the three things that can just tear people apart. And so communicating to your spouse, to your family, if you have dependents, where you're at in your business, what the goals are, where you're at financially with that business is important, especially at the onset, to make sure everyone's on the same page. Because the last thing you want is to put at risk the things that are more important, the relationships with your family, your spouse, the things that really matter in life, because of the financial money aspect of running a business that can put strain on those relationships. So, there's part of being an employer too and a business owner is a lot of times you get disappointed with the people you're working with because it's easy to expect them to care as much for the business as you do. And even if you don't, even if that's not something that you face and you're not a perfectionist like I am, even if that's not the case, it's very demoralizing when you have, say, 3 or 4 employees and one of them's been with you for a long time and then they leave and it leaves you in a big hole, or you have to go train people, or if you have a turnover in one position a lot, it can just create a very demoralizing thing where you feel like you're alone. You're the only one that cares about the business. You're the only one that cares about the customers. And it gets very lonely because you feel like everyone else has a plan B and a second option to go get another job. And yet you're stuck there holding everyone else's, when everything, falls, you're the one that has to pick it all up, all the pieces. And it can be very, very lonely place, realizing that every single one of your employees has a second option, a third option, a fourth option in this kind of labor economy. And yet you as the business owner are going to pick up all their slack if and when they leave. And when they do leave, especially if it comes at a time when you are personally going through other things, or you're really busy, or the business is at a junction point, or even if you're growing really fast, that can actually be a point of stress. Therewith, in that moment, someone leaves that you've trained, that has been there for a long time, that is a tenured employee that you can depend on, and then they leave for whatever reason, and it can be very demoralizing. And you realize that everything really does fall back on you at the end of the day. So, but today I don't really want to just focus on why business owners fall into depression or a dark place. I want to actually, how do you get out of it, or how do you avoid it, or how do you make it better? Because I've talked about before in the podcast the loneliness of being an entrepreneur and how hard it is, and even about depression and things like that, and thinking about suicidal things during those dark places, hurting yourself, hurting other people. I've talked about that before, but today I want to actually give 10 or 11 things that I was thinking about and that I've either talked to other individuals in the entrepreneurial community or other people who have gone through these kind of depression things before. I've talked to them, and from my observation, these are the things that would help some people. And this is not an exhaustive list, but for a lot of the individuals I've talked to, some of these things can help. And some of them might seem really elementary. Some of them might seem really basic. Some of them might seem very mechanical, like you're forcing yourself to do something. But maybe this isn't the episode for you. Maybe some of these things wouldn't work for you. But I think for someone listening, 1 or 2 of these things might be the key that helps you think about something else when you come to that dark place. And in that, when I say dark place, where that is and what that is for you and what it's felt like for you. I've come to that place before. Like I said, I've never been suicidal, but it definitely come to places where you just feel like kind of giving in. You kind of question yourself in terms of, are you an entrepreneur? Can you run a business effectively? Is it really worth the pain? Should you just go get a job? You start second guessing and having regrets about maybe not going to school or getting a better education or taking someone else up on a job offer that they gave you. And you start having doubts and questions and fears and anxieties, and it just becomes like this big thing and becomes really elevating your mind. And all of a sudden it's like this encompassing thing for you. And especially when you get alone, it can really affect you and really come to, like I said, a dark place. So first of all, number one, I would say is, first of all, you have to be self-aware enough to realize you are struggling, especially if you have clinical depression. And you got to realize, you got to be self-aware enough to know that you might need to temporarily address it with medicine, or even to have a medical a mental health professional help you. It's not a bad thing. There's a massive stigma around mental health that I think in the next 10 or 15 years will be broken in our society. But mental health is something that the medical community necessarily doesn't understand very, very well. It's something that over the past 15 to 20 years has become more and more of a topic of discussion with the rise of technology, social media, and things like that, and how it's affecting us. And so I think that so many people have a stigma around mental health, depression, having these thoughts of loneliness or suicide, and because of that, they don't deal with the issue, or they're too ashamed, because this is the deal. When a lot of these things that I'm talking about today is us as entrepreneurs, the majority of us are type A go-getters. We don't like to really necessarily maybe take advice, or we're kind of hard-headed and stubborn and we just like push things through ourselves. And so when it comes to times when we feel alone, we're much less likely to reach out and ask someone for help. Like I know that for a fact for me. Like I would just never ask someone to help me just because I'm that way in my mind. Like I'm going to get through this. We're strong-headed. And so a lot of entrepreneurs, there's positive tendencies to that. We push through the hard times, we grind, we hustle, we get work done, and we make things happen. But on the flip side of that, when you actually are going through something and you need someone else to help you, whether it be from a medical standpoint or mental health professional, even going on medicine for a while to get you through those periods when you do want to hurt yourself or you're really, really low, it's not a bad thing. I think it's actually a level of maturity to realize that, hey, like I am a certain way. I'm going to be a little bit stubborn. I'm going to be a little hard-headed. I'm going to need someone to step in and help me during these times. And I don't think there should be a stigma around reaching out for help from, at the very highest level, a medical, like someone that's a professional at mental health and medicine, even just reaching out to more of a friend at a friend level, which we'll talk about in the future. But it's something that has to be, you got to be self-aware enough and humble, but not even humble. Like I don't think there needs to be humility around the fact, like the thing is, if someone breaks their leg out there, no one blames them for going to the hospital or calling an ambulance. Like you're hurt, you're injured, you need help. And yet, for some reason, when it comes to mental health, someone that is suicidal or depressed, because they can go and deal with those symptoms by themselves alone without anyone seeing, they won't call for help. And they think somehow that they can just get through it themselves, or that they're just different, or they're weird, when in reality, they're just as sick as the individual who has a broken leg, but it's only having a physical manifestation, and other people are able to recognize it easier than a mental health condition where no one can see it and you can deal with the symptoms of it alone by yourself without anyone seeing, and it's very hard to diagnose. And so I think the first thing our society has to do over the next 10 to 15 years is get rid of the stigma around mental health and the conditions of depression and suicide and things like that. Before we can even start dealing with the problems and creating solutions, we have to get the stigma around it so we can actually have conversations about it. And that's really the main reason why I'm having this podcast today, is to open up this conversation. Whether it be between you and your partner, between you and your spouse, between you and your employees, between anybody. Having this conversation and talking about these things takes away the stigma that no one wants to talk about it, when we would always we talk about cancer, we talk about heart conditions, we talk about all these diseases or ailments or sicknesses, and the cold everyone gets shots for like all the time. It's just like a normal thing. And yet when it comes to depression, mental health, everything from eating disorders and all the things around the mental health kind of world, somehow, for some reason, we just kind of push it aside. We don't really talk about it, and we kind of feel weird talking about it, because simply due to the fact that we can't lay our eyes on it. It's very hard to put our eyes on it. It's something we can't touch, we can't see. It's in your head, it's in your heart, it's in your body. It's chemical. It's not physical. And so I think the first thing we have to do is have a conversation to release that stigma, let it go, and then actually be able to deal with the problems. So first of all, number one, I wrote down here, I just have some notes today, is being self-aware enough if you do have clinical depression, if you do have suicidal thoughts, to actually reach out and not feel like you're a loser, not feel like you're giving in, not feel like you're somehow weird by doing so, but that you might need temporary help, whether it be from a mental health professional or from medicine and different types of drugs that can be used to alleviate temporarily for you to get through those hard times and get back on your feet. Number two, I would ask yourself the question, if you're actually thinking about depression or anything like that, is the problem temporary? And this is something that I said a long time ago, is kind of a phrase I said, and that was, many times suicide is a long-term solution to a short-term problem, but the person fails to see the end of their dark place. So a lot of times when you look at suicide, someone takes their life, and if you look at the situation that actually caused them to do that or pushed them over the edge, it's actually something that would have kind of played itself out. It would have ended up working out. It maybe was a relationship that didn't work out, or a business that failed, or they went bankrupt, or they lost their house, or whatever it was that happened. They have a long-term solution, which is for suicide, it's killing themselves, which is permanent. They have a long-term solution for a short-term problem. Like if you go bankrupt, in 7 years, it's off your record. Like it's a short-term issue. But it can become very inflated in our minds and become as if it's not short-term, if it is permanent, when in reality, the decisions we make through the time of that depression or through those times of suicidal thoughts need to be geared towards the fact that like we just need to get to the temporary. Because on the other side, in the long term, we need to make decisions that are going to fortify our growth and our expansion and getting out of that place, and that suicide is not the answer for that. Third thing I wrote down is what is going right. So really it's like focus on the good. So many times you get in this dark place, everything seems negative, everything that you see annoys you, everything in your business, then you go from your business because there's financial pressure, you go home, and then everything with your relationship is wrong, and your kids this, and then all of a sudden everything starts annoying you, and you start really focusing on the negative things around you. I would really challenge you to focus on the good things. What's going right in your life? And for everyone, regardless of how low you are, there is something good happening. And if you're living in the United States, that's a huge thing for you. That's a huge plus. There's opportunity. We don't have war happening on our streets every day. We don't have people walking down the streets with machine guns or busting into our houses on a continual basis. Like we don't have that fear in general in most parts of this country. There's so many things we can be thankful for and see that are positive in our life. It can be everything that's so basic, from stepping outside and having clean air, to a sunset, to the way that someone smiles at you, or they do something kind for you. There's so many things that we can be thankful for, and focusing on the good. And one of the things that I do, and I try to think about when I'm kind of getting to a kind of, not what's the word I'm looking for, kind of a melancholy kind of state, moody state, is in the morning is my biggest thing, like is to try to snap myself out of it, because if I sleep decent and I wake up, having the morning affirmations, being thankful for things, and starting to get your mind in the forcing it to start picking up on stimuli that you're thankful for and that are positive, is a good way to start your day out right on the right foot. Instead of waking up and right away being like, oh, I hate my job, or I don't want to go in the office, or this coffee is not hot enough, or I didn't like this, or like I stubbed my toe getting out of bed. Like try to force your mind to start coming up with things that are positive in your environment. And what I try to do is kind of try to come up with one new thing every day, like completely new, like something. After like doing it for a few years, you almost start running out of things you think, but somehow you just keep thinking about, like, I'm thankful for the new pair of shoes I got. Like, not everyone in the world gets those nice pair of shoes, and I haven't got a nice pair of shoes for a long time. So like, that's a really nice thing. Like, that's something that you start forcing your mind to do that every morning. Do it for 5 different things. Okay, I'm thankful for that. I had a really good employee. I'm really thankful for the job that really went well. I'm thankful for, I'm realizing the positive, I'm focusing on the good client that I just signed up the other day, or whatever it is for you in your business or in your personal life, focusing on those things, one of the best ways to do that, I find, is those morning affirmations, thinking about those things. And whether it be, if you're religious, for me, it's prayer and it's reading the Bible. And those are the things that really allow me to get off to a positive start in the morning. And it doesn't have to be super long, but even if it's like thinking about those few things, those 3 or 4 or 5 things that are positive, that I'm thankful for, 20, 30 minutes, reading the Bible, meditation, whatever, for some people it's exercise, whatever it is to get you in the morning, a lot of times it really sets your day off to a much more positive tone if you're struggling with negativity. And then think about, like, when I say about focusing on the good, also what activities, hobbies, or conversations trigger you to feel loose and free. So you might come from a dark place, you might have really hard times, but now I want you to think about the times when you're not that way. When you feel good, when you feel like you're not thinking about that problem, that situation, that thing that's going on at the business, that issue with the relationship, the thing that happened in the past, whatever it is, when you're not thinking about that and you feel free and light and not in that dark place, really be self-aware enough to realize, what are those things? What are the triggers to those emotions of freedom and feeling like you have a hope and happiness and laughing? It might be something as simple as watching sports, or maybe it's a hobby that you do. Maybe it's a painting, something you used to do in your past. Maybe it's sports. Maybe it's going to a certain restaurant. Maybe it's singing or certain songs or people that you're around. What are those things that have the ability to take you out of that dark place? And the reason that it's so important to recognize and identify those positive triggers, and we're going to talk about the negative triggers, but positive triggers, the reason is so important to focus on those good things is so that when you do feel like you're going to a state of depression or wanting to hurt yourself, that's when you go back to those things. That's when you go back to doing those things that are the triggers to you focusing on the good things of life, and being able to identify what those triggers are allows you to use them when needed. If it's a certain song, if it's going to a certain place, if it's talking to certain people, if it is avoiding certain people, like more of a negative trigger, we're going to talk about that. But like, what are the things that allow you to get to a state of mind, get to that place where you're not feeling depressed, you're not feeling lonely, you're not feeling bad for yourself, and you're able to be the real you, the full version of you. Number 4 is identify the stressor. So many times we just feel overwhelmed by so much, and we don't actually pinpoint the stressor. And so you've got to be self-aware and reflective to know you have a physical or emotional reflex to a certain situation and the triggers. So this is something that takes a lot of time that even I'm not super good at yet. I guess it's really just you get to know yourself more and more and begin to realize what kind of triggers you to go into a place of feeling negative. And for me, it's really fast. Like, I can switch really quickly just by hearing one thing. And literally, I'll hear something from somebody. I'm getting better at recognizing the physical manifestations or feelings behind being negative. And so this is something that I feel like science is going to delve more and more into in terms of the physical manifestations and reflectors of negative thoughts. And there's already plenty of research in terms of like heart rate, blood pressure, cardiac disease, of the effects of having negativity always in your system. But actually being able to realize that and recognize it is actually really interesting, because someone will tell me something, 5 minutes later, I'll just be like, why am I feeling so negative? And I won't even remember what I just heard. I just don't, and I actually have to stop and think, like, what was said? And I go back in my mind to like, what did I think? What was said to me? What did I see that like triggered something for me to be negative, or for me like an emotional, to start having a negative perception of everything happening around me. And if you trace it back, and you're able to realize the trigger, it usually will help you like, oh, well, like that will take care of itself, or that's not a huge issue. Like, I need to like retrain myself to get back on track and like stop thinking this way. And you actually can feel it in your body. Like, I feel it. I can't like describe it very well. Like, I guess I'd say it's in my chest, but like increased heart rate. Like, I don't know what it is, but like you can feel it. Because the body has a very chemical response to the things that it's hearing, seeing, and your moods. And it's all hormonal and things like that. And so realizing that, you can actually begin to identify the stressors. What are the things? What are the situations? What are the things that are said? Who are the people? What things are you watching when that stressor, that trigger happens and puts you into that negative state? It could be as simple as a certain time of the day. It could be as simple as not getting enough sleep. It could be something. What is it triggering you that is making you fall into this state? And being self-aware enough to actually like rewind in your mind back to the time where like, what happened for me to start thinking this way? What triggered me to get into this state of depression or into this dark place? Number 5 is, can you cut out the stressor? All right, so now we've identified the trigger or the stressor that's causing you to get to this dark place. Can you cut it out? And from a business standpoint, a lot of times if the trigger is something to do with the business, you can ask yourself, can you cut it out? Like, is part of the business or a certain department or a service that you offer causing you to get stressed, causing you to get depressed because of everything that's happening? So for example, I will talk to business owners that are so involved and like worried about like a third of the revenue from their business, when if they just cut that revenue out and they just like, can they cut the stressor out, that third of the business that just takes all their time and energy and mental, and there's problems and there's always a hard time to staff and all that. They're not making money in that department. Like, could you just cut out that third, focus some of that time and energy and mental thought process towards the other 2/3 and grow it? Like, from a business standpoint, can that happen? Like, we cut out certain services at Augusta Lawn Care. They were the ones that were causing the most stress. They were the ones that were hardest to find skilled laborers for. They were the least profitable. Like, why are we doing it? Like, we have revenue. Yes, we want to grow, but like, why try to keep the things that are the most stressful in your business? Can you cut them out? Like, can you cut out that customer that's super nagging and usually it's it keeps you up at night thinking about their account and what you have to do the next day for them, and like they're always nagging you and calling you after hours? Like, can you cut them out? And so many times we don't, because like we needed the revenue, or we like think that we can't, or like we can't stop doing that service, when really that service is the least profitable, most time-sucking aspect of your business. And if you cut it out, you'd make up for the revenue in some other department within 12 to 24 months, simply due to the fact that you no longer have to worry about this other thing. So can you cut out that stressor? Is it an employee? Now, are they replaceable? Is the customer? Like, what do you need to cut out? Can you cut it out? Because, if the stressor is your wife, or a loved one, like, you're not going to cut them out and just be like, you're gone, like, bye. You're going to realize maybe there's certain aspects of their personality. Maybe there's certain triggers, stressors that are part of what they do that you can just start to talk to them about. But if you realize that they are the stressor, they are the trigger that's causing you to do something, then you can have the conversation. Same thing with the customer. If you realize, okay, you're self-aware enough to actually realize that dealing with this customer is a trigger to me getting into a bad place in my mind. If you can realize that, you can have a dialogue with them and make changes and just be open and like, look, you make me stressed out, and we either have to change these things in the business, in our relationship, whether it be an employee, a customer, a family member. Number one thing is realizing, identifying the stressor, the trigger, and then number 2 is, can you cut it out? All right. Number 6, the 6th thing is that I find a lot of times people falling into, especially in the entrepreneurial community, going into a dark place, is unrealistic expectations. And so, is the stress coming from your own unrealistic expectations or the expectations of another person? So like, when it comes to unrealistic expectations for yourself, I feel like some people put pressure on themselves to build $1 billion business, or like they just have this massive ideology. They have to do this great, enormous, amazing thing overnight. And so because they're unrealistic expectations, they are setting themselves up for failure, and thereby setting themselves up to feel like they're worthless and they're not good enough, and that they didn't meet their goals or whatever. When if they actually step back and realize that like the chances of them doing that are like 1 in a billion people will actually do that business in that amount of time and make that much money, it's just crazy to think that you're going to be that individual and that you're going to bank your happiness and your contentment on being that 1 in a billion, being that 1 in 500,000 people that make $1 trillion-dollar business in 2 years. Like the unrealistic expectations will cause someone to become to a place where they start to feel worthless, or they don't feel like they're successful. And it's absolutely crazy. What's more crazy is when someone's unrealistic expectations from an external person begin to affect them. Like maybe it's a parent and they were really successful, and now you have pressure or expectation that like you have to become that. Or maybe even like if you're living in the shadow of some other person or you're a family member, and they just put pressure on yourself, these expectations that you've kind of put in your mind that you have to become can really cause someone, and like the chip on your shoulder, that's one thing, right? Like expectations, like someone says like, you aren't worth anything, you aren't going to do anything, and there's a chip on your shoulder that kind of drives you through and pushes you. And a lot of entrepreneurs, business people have that. We got the chip on our shoulder from something that was said or done, or we want to prove someone wrong. But if you allow those expectations to get too much and just to rule your mind, that chip can become a very heavy weight on your shoulder as you begin to progress, if you allow it to dominate you. And if you allow it to become governed by if you allow your expectations to be governed by the opinions and expectations of others, you're setting yourself up for an absolute failure. Number 7 is physical health affects mental health. This is a big one. The first thing when someone comes to me and they're talking about feeling suicidal or being depressed or really anxious or something's going wrong in their business, the first thing I'm thinking about is like the basics. Eat, sleep, diet, nutrition. Like, how are you doing? Like literally those 4 things: sleep, diet, nutrition, exercise. Like, are you sitting all day? Your body needs to be mobile. You need to get your heart rate up. You need to sweat once a day. Like, you need to stretch. Your body is literally like the fascia and the soft tissue is just like, it needs to have that release. It needs to be stretched out. It needs to have that cardiovascular endurance. It needs to do something for 20 minutes. Sweat once a day is my sort of philosophy. Just like I don't work out super long. I don't, do anything nuts, but I just try to stay active 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day. I try to sweat. Right? Just try to stay active, exercise, sleeping. This is my biggest thing is like, I don't sleep a whole lot. And so if I'm going through a hard time mentally, or I'm going through like a moody time, almost always 90% of the time, if I just go and sleep for a couple days straight, an actual like 6 to 8 hours, I'd be much, much better. And so again, us as entrepreneurs, we push through it. We're strong-headed. We're type A people. We're just like, I can go. I got to get this done. I got this project. Like for me right now, it's like trying to get all this franchise stuff done has been a huge, a lot of time. Like I could spend the next probably 2 months solid, no sleeping, no eating, doing nothing but just, making training and developing the websites and like making it better. I could just work and work and work. And so realizing that sleep is important. Diet and nutrition is important. Having a low carb diet is important, especially if you're going to be sitting a lot. If you're not active outside, if you're behind a desk all day, like don't be eating refined sugars and refined carbohydrates. Cut out some wheat, cut out some corn, like focus on the meats and the vegetables and nuts and things that are high protein. Like this is not rocket science. But physical health affects your mental health. And to think that you're going to get through your mental health issues without addressing the fact that you're sleep deprived, you have a really lousy diet and are gaining weight, you don't exercise, and you haven't sweated in 3 months, like you've got to address these issues. Number 8 is having what I call, or I kind of phrased up, a one more day mentality. And that is just like thinking in terms of the short term. Because so oftentimes in that depressive state, you start casting a shadow on like the future, like so far down the road, and start thinking negative things about like that's what's going to happen in a year and 5 years, and then what's going to happen in 10 years. And you start like building this massive thing in your mind when really like in 10 years, your life is going to be like completely different. And you're going to be in like a completely different place and different business and different people around you, different relationships. Like it's going to be a different whole world for you. But we cast that shadow so far in our future when we're in that negative place, like, and even especially if you want to hurt yourself, or you're suicidal is like one more day mentality. Like get through one more day. If you can just get through one more day. And it's not something you want to be in a place like that for a long term. You don't want to be having to do that for years and years and years of your life. It's not sustainable. But to get through those low moments, sometimes just getting through that one day and realizing that you're going to have to be patient with yourself, and that the same way that it takes time to heal a bone or heal a scar or a surgery or some physical ailment, it's the same way that you're going to have to be patient with yourself when it comes to your healing in your head, in your mind, and in the way that you think. Like it's going to be a process. It's going to take time, and you've got to stop trying to cross bridges way before you get to them. Trying to fix the business, trying to hire the next employee before the employee that they're going to replace even quits. Like, okay, well, what if they quit? And then who would hire them? And then like, if that happens, then what about this? And then if the economy turns down and then they leave, and then what if just crossing bridges way in advance, starting to think about like 2030. And you start worrying and building up something in your mind, or like whether it be in your personal life or in your business, like you just build up this massive thing, and all of a sudden you're crossing bridges and making decisions and getting worried about things that are like so far in the future they're probably not going to happen. But having that mentality of just like, I'm going to live one more day, especially if you're suicidal, like I'm just going to live one more day, and thinking about like the devastation it would be to those who do care about you if you did take your life, if you did end it all, if you were selfish enough to kill yourself, like what it would do to the people who do love you, who do care about you, to your family, to the employees, the people who you have positively affected, the devastation it's going to do to them. Maybe you have to think about that to keep that one day mentality. Like, I got to get through this one more day. I got to wake up one more day. And just thinking in the short term, because we can start casting shadows otherwise so far into the future that it's always going to be it's always going to be that way. It's always going to be, we're always going to have those issues. We're always going to have those problems, when in reality, most of the time we're going to get through it in a short-term solution. Like there's going to be it's going to be a short-term issue. We're going to get through it. Maybe it's a day, maybe it's a week, maybe it's a year, maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10 years, but you'll get through it. And so using that one day mentality can be effective. And sometimes, number 9, I have like deal with the root of the problem. This is the hardest one, because dealing with the triggers, the thing that kind of like tips you over the edge and gets you in that state, is important. But being willing to deal with the uncomfortable, deep situations or people that caused your mental state, and being willing to do the hard work, that's tough. Like actually being able to like, okay, I know what triggers me, or I know what kind of makes me go into this state, but then be able to go even deeper than the trigger and realize the cause, like what happened. It could be something in your childhood. It could be a divorce. It could be something from your family that messed you up. It could be a business deal that messed you up, and someone did something that broke your trust, and now you have that issue. Whatever it is, trying to go back and actually find the root of why you can even be triggered to go into that negative state, that takes a lot of thought. Sometimes it's not even possible to actually realize why. Sometimes we just have like hormones, and we're going through things in our life, and we're humans, and we got all these environmental stuff, and you got radiation, you got technology, all this stuff happening. We're humans. We aren't like the strongest things in the world. We're not the best things. No one's tough or ironclad. Like everyone has issues and problems. And so sometimes you can't find a root. You can't find a reason. You can't pinpoint like that's the reason why. But the reason I find it effective to actually try, or actually to dig deep and be like, you know what, that might have scarred me as a kid, or that situation with that relationship, when that ended and that broke in a negative fashion, like it changed my whole perception on trusting people and trusting employees and trusting customers. Like, so like if you can actually trace it back, the reason identifying the root problem is so effective is you can actually start to deal with the problem and do the hard work. And that might be hard and impossible possibly, but doing the hard work is like if you can deal with the root problem, you have a better chance of actually making it to where the triggers don't even trigger you anymore. If you can deal with the divorce, if you can deal with the family member that hurt you, or the business partner that you broke your trust, or the bankruptcy that you went through and actually go and talk to someone about it, talk to the people who it hurt, whatever it was, and you actually deal with the root issue, that can be the most effective if it can be found. And realizing that some things are just like we're humans and we're weak. Like just realizing that we have hormones and we have good days, and we have bad days, and we aren't going to always have it figured out. We're not always going to be perfect. Like that's sometimes the case, and we just have low moments in time and times when we get really, really low. But if there's an actual root problem that has a consistent trigger that always goes back to that thing, there's something that if you're willing to do the hard work, broken relationships, addictions, secrets, having regrets from the past, those are a lot of times the things I see that are the root problem that then later on in life, and now as someone's going through it, there's certain triggers that cause them to go into that negative state. And the last thing is number 10, have someone to share things with. It might be a friend, it might be someone. Most ideally, if you're dealing with business issues, financial problems, try to talk to someone that has gone through the same thing and can relate to you. 5 years ago, I would have had a different sort of outlook on mental health, depression, suicide, like all of those sort of things. It's not until you experience it with people that are close to you. It's not until you deal with it with individuals that are talking to you about it. The past 5 years from Business Bootcamp, I've probably had at least 24 people talk to me specifically about either being depressed from their business or even wanting to commit suicide because of their business. And so it's led me to start thinking more and more about the other 200, 300 people who aren't saying anything and are going through the same problems and issues. And so my number 10, one of the biggest things is find someone to share these things with. The worst thing you can do is bottle it all up and think about it alone, and it just compounds and gets worse and worse and worse. The same way, if you took a disease or a broken arm or whatever, and like out in public, you try to make it look good, and like you were like operating just fine, but all the time your arm is broken, but you're like, oh no, I'm going to look fine. I'm going to look okay in front of everyone else. But then when you go by yourself, it hurts and you can't sleep because it's just like infected and bruised and it's still broken. Now it's beginning to get worse and worse and get inflamed and swelling. The same thing can happen for mental health conditions. If you don't deal with it, if you don't go out and get help, if you don't go talk about it and expose it with someone else, and you just bottle it all up inside when you're alone, it's just going to get worse and worse, and it's going to start affecting other parts of the body. It's going to start affecting other parts of your mind when we're talking about mental health. And so deal with the issue. Go talk to someone else about it. We've got to remove the stigma where we deal with, like, we fight all these things by ourselves. And when we get to these dark places, we actually retreat from people instead of that being the time when we actually need to draw people in and get help and support. And it's completely backwards. For some reason, when people think about depression, they think that's if I'm in a depressive, moody, down space and spot in my life, I'm going to like retreat from everyone else. I just want to run away from everyone else, when the thing they actually need to do is invest in others and allow others to support them and be more and more connected. And it might be a friend, it might be a family member, it might be a spouse, it might be a parent, it might be a counselor, it might be a pastor, it might be someone that you trust or look up to in a business sense if you're going through more of a business stressing situation. And getting that support, giving how you're feeling, what you're going through, and then getting their feedback, getting their support, or even just having an ear for them to listen. So that when you get to that negative place, you can have someone to lean on. That's important. So that was number 10. Those are the 10 things that I've talked about with a lot of people, and most recently this past 2 weeks, 3 or 4 people. So I wanted to kind of talk a little more deeper about it. Like I said, this is a topic I'm very passionate about. I feel like we don't talk about it enough. We talk about the money, and we talk about like the marketing, and we talk about like go and push and grow and build the business and hire people and more and like go for an IPO and all these things. And we fail to realize that it's putting a lot of stress on the people who are trying to get there and have unrealistic expectations, or they've had issues in the past, or these have dark moments. And we're going to lose people that are dear and near to us if we don't deal and talk about these issues before they actually become festered and affect other parts of the body. Like I said, in terms of that physical ailment just being neglected. So I just wanted to bring that as a topic today. I know it's kind of like a downer or like a negative thing perhaps, but I think for some people it might be just what they need to reach out to somebody else and ask for support and say, I need help here. So I hope that helps someone today. If you have any questions or you want to talk to me about something, businessbootcamppodcast.com. You can find me there, and I'd love to help you in any way I can. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.